It's got many names. Native Americans call it the Father of Waters. The Mississippi is also called Old Man River, and by some, the Big Muddy, for all the sediment that flows south. It was this mud and sand that built the expansive Mississippi Delta, land that is sinking as surrounding waters rise.
My name is Captain George Ricks. I own and operate getaway fishing charters out of Hopedale, Louisiana. Slow down a little bit, Steve. You ain't fishing plastic now, you're fishing live bait. We catch a variety of saltwater species. But our target species, which is our number one, which attracts all of our recreational fishermen, is a speckled trout.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a red.
But this is not purely saltwater. The area, rich in fish, crab, oysters, and shrimp, is an estuary.
What an estuary is a delicate balance of fresh and salt water. That's what makes our water so fertile. Do we need fresh water in an estuary? Absolutely. Do we need salt water in an estuary? Absolutely. It's that delicate balance, that mixture, that makes this estuary what it is, makes our fishing and our seafood industry so outstanding.
In his 70s now, with no sign of slowing down, clients trust their day on the water to Ricks.
You know, I started fishing when I was 6 years old. My father fished before me. He caught crabs and fished, and his father before him.
In his years on the water, he's seen Louisiana's delicate coastline wash away. By all accounts, this region is losing a football field worth of marshlands every 100 minutes.
Every year you come out, you see less and less land?
Oh, yeah. Well, right here, there was an island 2 years ago. There was an island right there. It's gone now. We all know what's happening. We see what's happening every day.
Let me ask you a bit about climate change. Do you think people down here have had their attitudes change in the last 15, 20 years about climate change?
Listen, I see it. We see it every day. We're out here every day, and everybody knows things are changing. You know, our hurricanes are getting more frequent and more powerful every year.
Shortly after this interview, Hurricane Ida hit the Louisiana coast hard. Its most punishing winds and storm surge sweeping through the very marshlands Ricks works. Scientists say it is climate change at its most devastating.
The river built the land that we're standing on, built New Orleans, built all of southern Louisiana, but we live on a river delta. And what river deltas do, geologically, is they sink over time. It's a natural process.
But there was nothing natural about the process that choked off the flow of sediment and fresh water from the Mississippi into the Delta some 80 years ago.
Just above New Orleans, Louisiana.
It was a series of dams and levees built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
The treatment? Concrete paving for the levee.
Kimberly Davis Rayer is with the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. The CPRA is pushing a plan to breathe new life into this sensitive area by something called sediment diversion.
New Orleans sits on the Mississippi River between Lake Pontchartrain and the Gulf of Mexico, what we call the Bird's Foot Delta. In years past, this river would overflow its banks in the spring and the fall, in the times when the water was high. And the water and sediment that flowed out of the river would build land, nourish the wetlands. When we leveed this river, we stopped that flow of sediment and water from the river into the wetlands.
So it basically choked off the potential growth.
Choked off the potential growth and essentially starved the wetlands from the water and the sediment that they need to be healthy, to thrive, to grow. The sediment diversion is planned for a spot 60 miles up the river, would simply reconnect the river to the adjacent wetlands. The idea is it'll be controlled, it'll be open when the river is high, when the river is most full of sediment, when it's most efficient to do this.
Diverting the Mississippi into the wetlands is the centerpiece of a $50 billion plan to restore Louisiana's coastline. It will help cope with the ills of climate change, since wetlands knock down a storm surge. The only reason the diversion plan is even on the table is the direct result of the BP Horizon disaster that claimed 11 lives and fouled much of the region with oil. $4 billion of BP settlement money is earmarked to restore the coastal wetlands. Alicia Renfro is a coastal scientist with the National Wildlife Federation, one of a host of environmental groups that is strongly backing the diversion plan.
You know, I think for a long time we've recognized that something needs to be done in Louisiana. The oil spill kind of highlighted what's happening in the Gulf Coast, but particularly in Louisiana. And so I think most people, it just makes sense when you talk about the river built this landscape. The river is the only thing that is going to sustain it for the long term.
They're talking about, at best, in 50 years, building 13,000 acres. That's a spot on the map about this big. That'll do nothing for this area here. We're going to continue to lose land, even with the diversion. But what it will do, it will eliminate our resources.
Ricks is among those fighting the state's big plans to save the wetlands. People who make a living on the water say by upsetting the delicate balance, there's the risk of destroying the environment that is so important for fishing, crabbing, shrimpers, and oystermen.
This is Granal, and we're going to go look at a oyster farm.
A few years ago, oysterman Boris Guerrero bet big on setting up his oyster farm. The water here has been perfect to grow a juicy, tasty oyster.
Let's do a taste test. Delicious. The salinity went up.
But the state's plan to divert the Mississippi is leaving a bad taste in his mouth.
Let's take that to its logical conclusion. If indeed they open this up and pump in a lot of fresh water, what is it going to do to you and other oystermen down here in Grand Isle?
It's going to wipe us out. I mean, the oysters are not going to like it around here. I mean, it's going to be too fresh for them. You know, you need a certain salinity for oysters to survive. And maybe if they do survive, how much percent of the year will have oyster that has no taste, for example? It's really a bad a bad scenario either way you see it.
Let's pick one. Well, you have a try, okay?
And there's one more variable at play. The tourism industry really keeps New Orleans afloat in many ways. Richard Hughes has owned and operated the famed Pelican Club in the French Quarter for more than 30 years. Losing the flavor of the Gulf, he says, will hit the tourism industry hard.
And I think it would be catastrophic. I really do. I'd put all these fisheries out of business and then expect them to come back when they turn the switch on again. That's not a really realistic scenario.
Some $300 million is set aside for what's called mitigation, helping shrimpers, fishermen, and others financially deal with the changes caused by diversion.
It's a culture and a heritage. What price do you put on that? You know, you can't put a price on generations of what they've done.
It's not simple. This is really complicated. It's messy. There are a lot of people involved. There are real concerns. This is going to cause challenges for certain people, and it's really important we recognize that.
Above all, supporters of the plan come back to one key argument. Do nothing, and all this eventually washes away.
I would say embrace the opportunity. We need to look at this as a chance for Louisiana to lead, a chance for us to find a way to live here safely, even if it means some change. And also, it's important that we all recognize status quo is not an option. Things are going to change. We need to decide how we want them to change.